Welcome, everyone. It's a great conference today, very well attended. And as evidenced by this highly attended conference, Los Angeles is rapidly becoming a world leader, not just in medicine, but also in biotech innovation. UCLA faculty play a key role in this movement. The UCLA Medical School and Health System are highly committed to the mission of translating great science into treatments that benefit patients all over the world. The business of science is now part of the curriculum and education of our graduate students and postdocs as a way to help build an ecosystem around the campus to host a growing number of biotech startups. This significant talent pool of undergraduate and graduate students across LA has a keen interest in entrepreneurship, which presents both an opportunity and a challenge to guide and mentor them. The California Institute of Immunology and Immunotherapy at UCLA is now a reality, with a capital commitment from Governor Newsom and philanthropists. It will combine scientific innovation, entrepreneurship, and translational science to build companies. Arie Belldegrun has been one of our faculty as a professor for the last 3 decades. He's worked tirelessly to put UCLA and Los Angeles on the global biotech scene. In the region around the UCLA campus, he built Jonsson, with an FDA-approved drug to treat advanced bladder cancer. Today, that company is part of Astellas. Cougar Biotechnologies, with the FDA-approved drug Zytiga to treat prostate cancer, is today part of J&J. Kite Pharma, which currently employs about 5,000 associates, has 5 FDA-approved products to treat leukemia and lymphoma, and is producing about $1.5 billion in life-saving CAR T products annually. Today, Kite is part of Gilead. The most recent addition to this ecosystem is the acquisition of Neogen by AstraZeneca, another of Belldegrun's startups, which develops next-generation TCR immunotherapy for solid tumors and is located in Santa Monica. You'll hear more about Neogen today from Mark Cobbold from AstraZeneca. Arie is not alone in his dedication to UCLA and the Los Angeles region. He has been closely collaborating with our UCLA professor stars, past and present, like Owen Whitty, Jim Economou, David Chang, Tony Rebus, and others. This conference is a great opportunity to showcase the power of the academic faculty at UCLA and their capability to transform cutting-edge science into innovation and life-changing products for patients. Please recognize today as an opportunity to meet and build collaborations with the next generation of these successful faculty entrepreneurs. We're excited to welcome 2 leading speakers who will provide keynote addresses, and for the Business of Science panel, an exciting group of experts has been assembled from Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Kronos, Allogene, and UCLA's own Dennis Slamon. So please welcome Arie Belldegrun.
Thank you all. This is the 5th year that we are doing Meet the Leaders in Biotech. And I have seen the number of the interest growing significantly. Not to forget that we had 2 years of COVID. This is the first year, last year it was with masks, 2 years ago on Zoom. And in the first 2 years was, modest increase in the number of participants. So it's great to see all of them here today. Can I have the first slide? But before that, I would like to invite to the podium the panelists. Let me see. Good. So let me start by saying that we have 2 big pharma representatives here from Pfizer and from AstraZeneca. Looking at the timely 2023 year, the IDEA Pharma released its 12th Pharmaceutical Innovation and Invention Index, by which they rated the best and the most innovative company, and the best in invention. So innovation is meaningful value for invention. And number one was Pfizer. 100 billion in revenue, second lowest in 5-year R&D cost per approval, 2 novel medicines approved this year, and number 4 in invention. Well, you'll have to make some explanation why only number 4. Give it some thought. Number 1 in invention index, which is the first in class treatments in any disease, AstraZeneca, 179 pipeline projects, of which 155 in clinical development, 2 novel medicine approved this year, 19% R&D success, number 3 in innovation. Regardless of all of that, so we have representative here from really the 2 most innovative and invention savvy companies. In addition, maybe next slide, we all know it all starts with patients, but for that we need great science. And I think at UCLA, we have our own Dennis Slamon, who has been running a lot in the cancer center, all the developments in the science. So we'll hear some today. We have representatives from biotech, from David Chang, from Allogene, and Norbert from Kronos Bio. After years and years, in 26 years or so at Gilead, moving to become a CEO. So that's a biotech aspect. And then in the pharma, as discussed. Maybe we can start with kind of what's hot a little bit and going on. In this slide, by the way, I would like to thank Chris Wire from our team at Vida Ventures, who helped me put that slide together. As you can see here, large cap pharma is at risk of losing 160 billion plus US revenue due to loss of exclusivity in the next 5 to 7 years. And you can see on the left panel, the loss of Humira by year, each year, the loss. Obviously, the greatest loss will be the 2028 when Opdivo and Keytruda, the checkpoint inhibitors, will be lost. And who is the one to suffer most? We put here a list that based on the best we have information. Obviously, what we showed us that Merck, BMS, and AbbVie are the most potential in need for new drugs. Pfizer has some need for 15 billion. And how the big question I would pose here is how do we fill this gap of $160 billion loss of drugs? Next slide, please. Last slide. Well, obviously, what can we do? What can the industry do? Number 1, M&A, life cycle extension, internal pipeline of R&D. These are the options. But if we look, what is the status today of the biotechnology? What can they deliver in the next 5 to 7 years? You can see the list here that we put the best we could find for ourselves. But as you heard just several months ago, Prometheus was bought by Merck. Horizon, we'll maybe kind of discuss it. Maybe, we hope so, by Amgen. And then Seagen, hopefully by year end, will be bought by, will get to be part of Pfizer. Just the 3, if they are completed, is over $80 billion in the last less than 6 months. So the big question I have, and maybe we should start with you, Aamir, on really the M&A. How best can a company fill the gap of you have 15 billion? You're going to spend 43 billion just on Seagen. So you have some work to do. But maybe, before I'm starting, it's more interesting. You are the chief innovative officer, business innovation officer for Pfizer. How one becomes such a powerful guy? I don't know, what did Dr. Albert Bourla see when he brought you in? You're not a PhD, you're not an MD. What's there? He probably saw something in you. Maybe you can give us, because there's a lot of postdocs, PhDs, thinking, how do I become somebody like you? So maybe we start with that M&A.
Okay, very well,
Good.
very well. Well, thank you for the question, Arie. And it is certainly not lost on me that I am the only non-scientist on this panel, and maybe one of the very few in the room. But let me just say it's a pleasure to be with this group, with you and the entire audience. I think what you point out, and what actually John said in his opening remarks to this panel really resonated with me, which is the role of talent in our industry. And it's very clear that scientific innovation is the heartbeat of what our industry needs to thrive. We need great inventions, we need great science. And without it, there isn't anything. Now, we also need, in addition to that, the ability to translate that science and actually bring it to patients. And in order to do that, there are a multitude of disciplines that are necessary, many of which we often don't talk about. Those drugs need to get manufactured. They need to get marketed. Very complicated contracts with private and public players around the world need to be negotiated. Resources are not unlimited. They need to be allocated in a thoughtful way. Transactions need to be conducted. And I think that creates an opportunity for people from many, many different disciplines to come into this industry. Having a scientific background is a very natural entry point, but I think that many different disciplines are necessary, and frankly, we need more diverse talent for this industry to continue to thrive. I began my career in management consulting. I did not come into this industry by design. I thought I was going to be a management consultant, explore many different things. And I ended up working for a interventional neuroradiology company as my first client. And it sparked a passion and interest in what science can do to help patients. And that's what I committed the last 25 years of my life to doing. And when I had the privilege of joining an amazing CEO, an amazing management team, and an amazing group of colleagues at Pfizer, that was a very easy decision for me.
So one way, go to McKinsey, and from McKinsey, you jump up there. Good. Okay, Mark, you've been a professor at MGH, and now you're AstraZeneca. Tell us a little bit more before we go to M&A.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Arie. I think I don't think anyone's sort of career is understood going forward. It's certainly understood going backwards. If you look back, it sort of makes sense. But at the time, I didn't leave medical school thinking we wanted to work in AstraZeneca. That just wasn't absolutely way outside of what I wanted to do. But life happens, and what I did have at medical school, I was the only medical student who dissected the lymph nodes of my cadaver. And I was fascinated by this thing that was not on our curriculum, which was the lymphatic system and the immune system. And I was just, I don't know why, but I grew intensely fascinated by this, and then took a degree in immunology and later a PhD in immunotherapy with cell therapy. And I think in terms of, at that point, these kinds of things were not trendy, and it's difficult, I think, sometimes to think about that in the 2000s, cell therapy wasn't that trendy, and immunology in cancer immunology wasn't trendy either. These were fairly fringe areas. So I think luck has played a role. And then suddenly, with TIL therapy, with checkpoint data coming through, the world woke up to the fact that human immunity is very much engaged in cancer, in perhaps the majority of cancers. And so there was a complete change, and MGH had made the critical mistake 10 years earlier of thinking that cancer was going to be cured with kinase inhibitors. And so I believe they fired their immunologists, and they hired a whole bunch of molecular geneticists, etc., to really bet this was the new future for cancer. And then there was this gap. So I was hired as a result of that. They were looking for cancer immunologists that wanted to build a group. So I joined Mass General, got very interested in redirecting immunity in particular and reprogramming the antigenicity of tumor cells so that they would match the immune recognition of a patient. And then AstraZeneca, Jose Baselga came to AstraZeneca, and he really shook AstraZeneca up and changed it. And he brought in a number of things, one of which was cell therapy. So we must build cell therapy at AstraZeneca. We must also build epigenetics. And so both of those were established, and I was recruited, and much of my time is been spent on building a cell therapy group at AstraZeneca. So I think it's a circumstance. I think I would attribute more to chance and luck than anything else. But you can't predict the future. I think it's very difficult to. But medicine is going through an incredible revolution at the moment, as is biology. And I think you're very well placed here. You've got that ecosystem that you've helped create, Arie. You've got the scientists, you've got the biotech, the pharma. It takes a village. You can't do this on your own. I think what you've got here is really quite special.
Thank you. Maybe we should go back to the M&A, to the mundane issues. How do you fill the gap of 160 billion plus? Do you have any? How is Pfizer going to do it? It's just another large acquisition,
Yeah.
or you have some other alternatives?
I'm happy to share our thoughts on it. So firstly, I would say the industry dynamic that you described, Arie, of these patent expiries is not a new one. The industry has gone through these cycles many, many times before, and clearly we're going through it again. So it's not a novel problem in that sense. Secondly, I don't think M&A alone we should think of as the only solution to that. From our vantage point, yes, we have you can debate the numbers, $15-ish billion impact of patent expiries, but we're going to address that through multiple avenues. We have a very robust pipeline of launches. We have 19 launches in the next 18 months that are going to make a very meaningful contribution to our growth. And secondly, we've been very clear that, yes, M&A will play a role. And we set out a very ambitious target of saying that we're going to generate $25 billion of risk-adjusted revenue by 2030 through M&A. And that'll be another contributor to addressing that patent issue. And the third is that we will do it through our own pipeline as well. There's a ton of exciting and innovative science that we're advancing, and it's going to be a combination of all of those things to address that, not just M&A alone. And the second I would say is I personally don't love the framing of M&A just being a solution to patent expiries. If I think about it, I think we have to think about an innovation ecosystem. In order for biotechs, and by the way, we've seen a 50% increase in the number of biotechs in the last 5 years. Those of you that were here for Albert's talk earlier, you heard him mention that if you look at the 20 largest medicines in 2021, 22, more than half of them came from biotech. And so this is a reality of where large pharmaceutical companies need to have a highly collaborative approach of working with biotechs because there's a mutual benefit, not just simply for addressing a patent cliff, but for bringing that innovation to the market and driving growth. And that's the lens that we're coming at it through. And to your very specific question from earlier, the combination of M&A that we've conducted and completed in the last 18 months, expecting the Seagen acquisition to close, we will be well upwards of 20 billion of that 25 billion ambition that we've set at Pfizer.
But going forward, few acquisition, big ones, small ones.
Our focus right now is to digest and make sense and deliver value from all the deals that we have done. There's clearly more M&A for us to do, and we're going to take our time and do it right and focus on bringing the most innovative science into Pfizer. For us, that will mostly take the form of smaller, more targeted acquisitions, as well as a host of other types of collaborations.
Well, one more question. I know it's a little bit sensitive, but you're a good politician. FTC, are you concerned, with the size, and you can see right now with the sensitivity, newspapers, FTC allows, doesn't allow. We'll see with the Amgen story and others. How do you look at it? Is this a consideration for you?
I mean, it's impossible for it not to be a consideration. We have to be practical. And clearly, large transactions right now are getting a huge amount of attention. And we certainly expected that. At the same time, I think about the transactions that we have done. We have successfully closed a number of transactions, including Arena, Biohaven, Reviral, GBT. And we expect to go down the same path with Seagen. And there's two principal reasons for it. Number one, the transactions that we are doing are A, pro-innovation, and B, they're pro-patient. These are all about advancing therapies, scaling them, investing in them, delivering them, and getting them to patients. So we see them as being things that will benefit patients. They are not going to harm competition, and they're necessary in order to bring these innovations to market. We expect that any large transaction is obviously going to get a lot of scrutiny, and we'll work through that. And the second piece of it is we have a highly collaborative and constructive working relationship with the regulators, and I think that is important in an environment like this.
Thank you. Dennis, very few academicians, physician scientists have been involved over the last 3 decades in developing, in helping the pharma to develop drugs, which are significant drugs today. Do you think that we, in general, the academic world and the science in the universities can help this to fill some of this gap at the expiring drugs, patents?
Well, I think there's no question that the collaboration between academic institutions and industry can be and should be critical in developing new therapeutics, identifying targets, validating targets, and then working with industry in actually bringing those forward in testing and ultimately bringing them forward into the market. Certainly, many of the things that I've been fortunate enough to be involved in doing, I could not have done without collaborations with industry. Now, the landscape is tending to change now because there are now CROs out there that can provide many things to investigators and investors that previously were only available through industry collaborations. So those things will evolve and change over time, but there's no question that those kinds of collaborations have been critical, are critical, and likely will remain critical going forward.
Norbert, you have a perspective of the pharma, of so many years in the pharma and then in the small biotech. Times are tough now in biotech, the macro environment, the micro environment, and all of that. How do you see that going on in order to continue the R&D development and developing all our kids without cutting programs and so on in that very interesting environment?
Yeah, just a quick look back over the last 2019, 20, and 21. As you know, COVID happened, Fed funds rate went down to zero. There was an incredible amount of money available, cheap money. That has changed. As you all know, Fed funds rate are above 5%. Money is more expensive. It's not so easy to come by. And I counted at one point that between 19, 20, and 21, there were 400 biotech IPOs. You could argue that's maybe a few too many. So what we're going to see over the next year is some consolidation, some bankruptcies, but it's all healthy. The Darwinian principle, the most, the strongest will survive. I think it's all good. We need a little bit more focus and a little bit more appreciation that money is expensive.
Okay. David, you have the perspective again of the Amgen, of Kite, and now Allogene. Where do you see the contribution here?
Yeah, so, let me, first start, about the innovation. Earlier, Dr. Bula talked about, where the innovation is coming and how that is shifting from biotech at 15% and within less than 20-year time frame, going up to about 55% of the innovation coming from the biotech. But, when I think about innovation, it's never a one-way street. It's always, a two-way street with the goal of doing something better and doing something faster. And certainly, when I think about the origin of foundation of Allogene, we took the assets out of a large pharma, Pfizer, to create a cell therapy company focused on allogeneic advancement of CAR T therapy. Why? Because their expertise and the speed at which small biotech can do was better suited, for the assets that were in development. So I think when we think about innovation, one has to understand when it comes from science to eventually translating to the benefit of the patient, it's not a single, solution about, is it just chemistry? Is it cell manufacturing? Or is it commercial? There are many different elements that, comes together to the goal of doing something better and something speedier. And I think that has to be one of the key goals of the innovation. I mean, ultimately, anybody can do all the things with the right resource. How to do that efficiently, I think, should be really the crux of any kind of licensing deals or mergers and acquisitions. To the second question, I'm going to touch a little bit on what Norbert has said. I mean, the biotech space, like anything else, has ups and downs. There was a tremendous upside of all the time, when the things should be on the more negative side during the period of COVID. If anything, that was, to everybody's surprise, where the biotech just took off. And when you look at the biotech, XBI is one of the indexes that one can follow, where XBI was before the pandemic and where it is right now. Actually, XBI is exactly at the same place. So there's a little blip that happened during the pandemic that is being adjusted. And I think, as Norbert is saying, it's bringing the entire ecosystem to a much healthier setting. The valuations are more right. I think consolidation and not everybody trying to do something on their own. I think the collaboration, working together, there's a more incentive to do that. From the company side, I can tell you, Allogene's experience, but I would say other companies are more or less doing the same thing. Control what you can. And that's really coming from the prioritization and also focusing on the execution. And also being very creative about looking at the cash runway or the financing, not just conventional financing, but also through the partnership, reverse merger, consolidation. So there are many different things that's happening in the entire biotech system. I think at the end, this whole experience will make the industry, biotech as well as pharma, even stronger. And with the science that's coming up from all the academic places as well as industry, I think this is really the future of the life sciences, where things will accelerate and will get better at much faster speed.
Great, thanks. In the next kind of 40 minutes, what I would like to do is go into more kind of specifics and try to cover, number one, the trending medical fields. Are we hot now on oncology, neurology, autoimmune, rare disease, or maybe just focus all our research to obesity? We saw that. It's quite a profitable business will be in the next several years. At the same, next is the trending modalities. We have, ADC that everybody's talking about, the small molecules, cell therapy, gene therapy, which of those are kind of interesting and in vogue today. Then the change in the landscape and the role of the China can play and is playing right now, which I would like to hear what you are doing. And finally, about our region, Los Angeles, and what we do here in our area. So maybe we can start, Dennis, with you. I know you'll be the most optimistic. Do you feel that there is a fatigue from oncology in the big pharmaceutical world? Because if I look at the acquisitions, this year there were about 10 acquisitions. I don't recall which acquisition was maybe one or two in oncology, where it used to be 3-4 years ago that it would be 50% oncology. Do you see some fatigue in oncology or not?
Well, there's been both fatigue and success in the sense that the fatigue is brought about by virtue of the fact that there's a lot of things that are now moving in oncology that are giving us positive results, not the least of which has been the whole rebirth of immune-based therapies, either checkpoint therapies or direct immune therapeutics by a number of modalities, either cell-based therapeutics, antibody therapeutics modified as bispecifics, or modified as ADCs, or used still as naked antibodies. So all of that is still on the spectrum. Small molecules still remain more challenging because they're tougher to develop in terms of specificity and dialing in that therapeutic window that you want. That's somewhat easier to do with an antibody because of the uniqueness of its interaction with the target you want to go after, whereas the small molecules can sometimes be more promiscuous. So that gives you bigger challenges on the therapeutic window. But I think all things are still in play. But there's little question that oncology has moved dramatically forward in many disease areas, not all, but many, where we've really improved outcomes to the point that the window for improvement becomes smaller and smaller. So you need to come in with therapeutics that are going to make an impact that's real. The difference between something that's statistically significant versus something that's clinically meaningful can be very wide. And I think people are, in particular payers, government payers, and insurers are paying more and more attention to what value you're getting by that therapeutic in terms of the impact it makes for the disease. But I think oncology is still a very rich field in which to explore and bring therapeutics forward.
Norbert, are you in agreement? What's your take?
Yes, I'm in agreement, and I would like to add, cancer is still the second leading cause of death in this country and in other countries. And that's why oncology will always be a very, very important field. I would like to make one comment, Dennis, about small molecules. It is true in general they are more difficult in terms of specificity, but there are a lot of small molecules that are multi-billion-dollar drugs. And for instance, in infectious disease, what Gilead has done in HIV and hepatitis C, those are all once daily small molecules. And I would like to make a point also, because we're working on small molecules. In oncology, if I look at two compounds, one by Pfizer, the CDK4/6 palbociclib, and the AstraZeneca, I'm just picking two examples because the osimertinib.
The most innovative one.
Yeah, no, but those are multi-billion-dollar drugs. They are great compounds that provide meaningful clinical benefit.
Aamir, are you a little bit have fatigue on oncology, or?
It's hard to say we have fatigue on it, considering we announced a $40 billion+ acquisition to take the battle to cancer. So no, we're incredibly optimistic about what needs to be done. In addition to being a massively debilitating issue still and a leading cause of death, as you pointed out, it is also, if you just look at the growth that is expected in oncology over the next decade, this is where the growth in our industry is still going to be. I think all of the points about needing to have a clear clinical benefit, that is what it is about. But we're incredibly optimistic about what is to come.
That's great. Is it true that if complete the transaction by the end of the year, Pfizer is doubling its power in oncology?
We are going to significantly enhance our position in oncology. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that there are many companies that are heavily invested in oncology. So we're not going to catapult ourselves to a number one position in oncology, but we are going to be a leading player in oncology with a focus on a number of specific therapeutics. And it's going to be a very core engine, along with multiple other engines that we have, including vaccines and a host of other TAs. So it will be an important part of what we do.
Yeah. Okay, let's move kind of brain science, neurology. Anybody of the panel has some views on on what's really happening, because there's so much development in science. The question is it translated to medicines? If yes, how much? John Mazziotta, when we talked just a few days ago, say when I went to my residency, there was 0 drugs in neuroscience. Today there are 8. Anything going on in excitement, investments in, I'm putting my head as a Vida Ventures, as a venture capital. Do you put now money into neuroscience or you wait? What is AstraZeneca thinking?
Oh, that's a tough question for me. I'm very limited to
The
oncology.
immune system plays a role there, so why not?
I still think we've got some way to go in terms of understanding, the pathology, what is the mechanism for diseases like, Alzheimer's disease. I still think we really don't understand that disease. And without understanding those diseases, you're not going to get to effective treatment. So I really feel that remains one of the last battlefields for medicine. We've had some recent sort of glimpses of success, but if you look at the data, they're not exactly amazing. I think you've got so much more to do in that particular field. But the actual etiology of that disease strikes me as extremely obscure at the moment. So I think that's the fundamental problem. And it's like, how do you get to models that can accurate? How do you get the material that you need to be able to study it and actually formulate the right hypothesis? Well, once we understand the mechanism, of course, you can drug it. You can drug anything. But to me, I think that's the challenge. And I think there's just that step change. I think in terms of, Parkinson's, there have been some, breakthroughs recently, in terms of understanding, the T cell recognition, and maybe that's going to open up some therapeutic avenues for those diseases. And of course, multiple sclerosis, with the publications last year implicating Epstein-Barr virus as causative in multiple sclerosis. I think, you've got some very, very strong guides there. So those diseases, I think, we should be amenable to therapeutics. There's no real antivirals that work particular for EBV. So, I think, and then of course, for neuro autoimmune diseases like lupus, we've seen some recent success with CAR Ts in the context of lupus. So, perhaps you can really start thinking about how you could, take what other fields have developed and apply it to neurology. But that's probably as far as I can go. As a more oncology, immunology.
David, you're a medical oncologist, but I'll give you an easy one on autoimmunity. Autoimmunity and CAR T and immunotherapy. How do you view autoimmunity going forward?
Yeah, let me go back to the initial question about oncology versus non-oncology. And, I think one thing that we have to recognize is that over the last decade or so, there is a very significant paradigm shift in how we treat the diseases. What used to be essentially managing symptoms with the understanding of the mechanism and underlying disease itself, it's really, treating the cause of the disease. And as you go to that kind of transition, I think the siloed approach of, autoimmune disease, oncology, or neurology, I think it will start breaking into more of an orthogonal way. The AI, which was talked about earlier, I think will eventually help to not just help us to understand the molecular mechanism of monogenic disorders, where we have a very growing and strong understanding to understanding the disorders that are polygenic in nature. What's really contributing to diabetes, more common diabetes and things like that. So the way I think, I see the future is, the question of, you have different modalities. I sort of think about it as a hammer. And then you will find the right nail where you understand the underlying mechanism and then applying the right hammer to that kind of situation. So, cell therapy is, one of the examples. When you think about cell therapy, that's really leveraging the immune system, probably one of the most powerful hammer that could be out there. And the initial place where it found the sweet spot is in hematologic malignancies, where the unmet need was high. And the outcome, as the earlier speaker has talked about, is really the story of Kite. From nothing, having a CAR T therapy that's, providing $2.5 billion in revenue, that was in 2022, treating now, more than 10,000. I think the number has gone up probably close to 20,000, if not more.
They showed today 14.2, just Kite.
That's just Kite. There are,
Yeah.
3 other companies in this
Yeah.
CAR T therapy
I don't know
space.
about them. Yeah.
And also, CAR T is a prime example where, you understand the disease itself much better than before. And also you are continuing to improve the hammer. And that's really coming from gene engineering and gene editing. And also trying to make the hammer more accessible to very different users. In our case, at our company, we are making the hammer the concept of Allogene egg, off the shelf, rather than having to manufacture the cells on an individual patient basis. And we are also seeing where the hammer can be applied, sort of growing, not just heme malignancies, definitely solid tumor. There was a Friends of Cancer research meeting this Monday that focused on the cell therapy. And one of the conversations that Peter Marks, who's the division director at CBER, was talking about is the next big change in the cell in the cell therapy will come from the applying gene editing and gene engineering to the point that the cell therapy can work in solid tumors. And so the field now going from hematologic malignancy to solid tumors. And I would say that is going even beyond that, especially in autoimmune disorders, lupus 1, scleroderma, some forms of myositis, multiple sclerosis, where you can really go after disease-causing cells, immune cells, and that can be either in the very directed way, or in the autoimmune disease setting. There's an emerging concept of immune resetting. Resetting the immune system where you can selectively eliminate the disease-causing immune cells to restore the disease, and I think that's becoming very attractive concept.
Aamir, you have some
I just
feedback on autoimmune?
Just wanted to make one comment on your question about neurology, and I think a lot of this comes down to making choices. Mark described it well. That is clearly neuroscience broadly an area that is a next horizon. There is very obviously massive unmet need. But if I look at it, for example, from our lens, we have to make choices, and a lot of our choices around where we deploy capital are anchored on, can we make a difference? Do we actually have some capabilities that can make a difference? And if I think about some of our most recent acquisitions, that's been a guiding principle. We have a multi-decade history in sickle cell. It's why we made the GBT acquisition. There are very deep capabilities in medicinal chemistry that we think we can use to complement and advance some of the ADC science at Seagen. That's another example. When it comes to neuroscience, we currently don't have those capabilities. So it's an area where we don't necessarily look at that and say, yes, we can deploy capital and make a very significant difference scientifically by the application of our capabilities. However, it raises a different question of, are there other vehicles that we have to help advance opportunities there? And I think about some of the things that we do with regards to our venture fund, or some of the new business models that we've created, Pfizer Ignite being one of them, where we actually offer clinical and research capabilities to partner with companies to help advance what they're trying to do.
So how does it happen, this Ignite? Because that's a very interesting aspect. How do you help? To whom we call? We call you? Or
You're welcome to call
you need
me.
help?
You're welcome to call me. You're welcome to call any members of our Ignite team. The concept is quite simple, which is in order for the biotech ecosystem to thrive, there are many things that those companies are incredibly capable at, but they also have needs. And there are needs that we have very, very deep capabilities that we have spent decades building. in the conduct of a clinical trial, in the design of protocols, in toxicology studies, in formulation, and the list goes on. And the needs for different companies are going to be unique, and we are interested and willing to provide those capabilities as a service to the right partners that have an aligned focus on areas of strategic interest to us and create a win-win partnership on how we work together to advance that science.
Thank you. Maybe we should jump to the trending modalities. Dennis, you touched quickly about that. When you look at this, the bispecific T-cell engagers, the antibody drug conjugates, the ADCs, these are no new modalities because we worked on it for many, many years. And suddenly now the time has come. So can you give us some perspective of the new rediscovery of the wheel?
Well, I can give you a perspective. I don't know how much it'll be worth, but the perspective
You've been
is
there,
certainly
so
there from the standpoint that I was involved in antibody therapeutics when I was told antibodies don't work. As far back as now, this is the 25th anniversary of trastuzumab or Herceptin. And while there was clearly a cadre of individuals inside the company that believed in this drug, it's fair to say that the management at the time did not, and did not think, and that was before Roche was involved, did not think that antibodies would work because there had been so many failures in the past. And it becomes instructive to watch that people stop looking at data and begin believing dogma more than you would think would happen in companies trying to bring new therapeutics forward. And that was the challenge at Genentech with trastuzumab. Plus, Genentech had come off two large failures in oncology. TNF and interferon didn't work as they thought they would work at the time. So believe it or not, the CMO at the time said Genentech is not an oncology company, but instead will view a cardiovascular and endocrine. And look at Genentech Roche today. It's almost all oncology. That said, the same can be true for ADCs. ADCs, as you point out, have been around forever. But what has changed is the knowledge of technology in terms of linker strategy and payload that has allowed us to deploy now these antibodies as therapeutic modalities where they don't release their payload early. You don't get the systemic effects. You really do get it to the target population. And that has really revolutionized that. So Seattle Genetics, Immunogenet, all the companies have been involved in developing that new linker strategy have really made that now something that can be used. Biospecifics has come along with, as you well know, Arie, our knowledge of how to really harness the immune system. We still have the challenges of managing CRS and things, and there are new strategies for doing that. But that is baked into the mechanism of how the drugs work. They bring in the immune system to destroy tumor, and with that comes cytokines. So we're going to have to figure out ways around that as we go forward. But all of this will happen, and I think this utility of the whole spectrum of immune therapies will definitely be there. And to the point that I made earlier with regards to small molecules, Norbert, I absolutely agree with you that, I mean, we were involved in the development of palbociclib. So we took that off the shelf and showed that it worked in ER-positive disease with Pfizer, and then worked with ribociclib and Lilly's abemaciclib. So there's no question. It's just that if you really think about it, those drugs, that happened a while ago. That happened now 15 years ago. Currently, it's been a harder road to hoe with small molecules. And
No, but there's
the RAS
isn't that
inhibitor.
too competitive area, the small molecules, which few targets, and everybody's running after the same target.
Right, G12C, now G12D, which is becoming more challenging.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
G12C, G12D, but these are the targets. So when you look, you are not innovative. You cannot be the one to run it, definitely in a small company. What's your approach?
Well, working with chemists that have unique chemistry, I think, gives you an advantage, and they're out there. We happen to be partnering with some really talented chemists at Caltech.
Yeah, you have some data now, no? Or some, maybe you cannot talk about this right now, but maybe give us some teaser
Well, yeah. So
on an ADC.
we're looking at the usual suspects in terms of small molecules with G12C and G12D. The company has been sort of stealth for a long time, but I think some of the data that was presented at AAC this year showed our hand in terms of what we have in those spaces. We are also looking at some of the things like the cell death pathways. MCL is still very, it's been a challenging target because of cardiotoxicity, but it's still an important one. I think that some of the epigenetic modifiers are important. It's known that we're looking at PRMT5. That's another important target, but there's a whole spectrum of those that are useful to look at. And some of the unique chemistry that the Caltech chemistry group in 1200 Pharma can bring to fore, I think has made that possible for us. On the antibody side, I think just the unique improvements in the linker chemistry and payload has made that all possible for us. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. By the way, I don't know if Owen Whitty is here, but I just calculated that in 1998, we produced the first ADC out of Agencis. And at that time, we had made a discovery on enfortumab, which is the anti-Nectin-4. And we worked, and I think it's one of the first deals we did with Seattle Genetic and created what's today is known Padcev, which the company Agencis was here in our backyard at UCLA and is today, at that time was acquired by Astellas, and now hopefully it will become part of Pfizer. So that's actually, it's over 25 years ago that we started with the ADCs. In the cell therapy, David, or actually, let me get with you. I think that, Mark, you have just made a acquisition almost across the street here at Neogene. And how are you looking at cell therapy? I can tell you that 8-9 years ago, I talked with your big boss CEO, and he said, sounds great, but we have no interest in cell therapy. So what has changed? You came and everything changed, or what?
Well, actually, it was Jose Baselga, who changed his mind. He'd witnessed and he's a force, or was a force, and he'd witnessed the success of cell therapy at Sloan Kettering kind of firsthand, having been a big skeptic of IO and cell therapy. And, he'd seen it, he'd seen that and was obviously involved in Juno, and that, effectively sort of baptized him into the view that cell therapy was a game changer. It could lead to curative outcomes for patients, quite profound responses. And so, he said, you must do this. I think initially AstraZeneca's reluctance was really the business model and, how you make something that wasn't particularly profitable. But, the view is, well, at some point, just like with antibodies, what these things will be, you can change it. So I think with Neogene, the neoantigen space has obviously been, one of the big sort of discoveries over the last 10 years, understanding how those T cells recognize tumors, and you have to sort of think about how you target those mutations, those driver mutations like the G12 Ds and Cs and Ds and everything. One of the things that has become emergent is you can find T cells that are reactive to those antigens within tumors. And so the kind of the promise that do we go with a vaccines approach, or do we go with something a little bit stronger? So we thought a cell therapy approach is probably the strongest. That's really going to test the hypothesis. I mean, some great work from Steve Rosenberg and also Eric Tran. I've just come back from Portland yesterday, actually seeing Eric. Where he's shown some really quite remarkable responses in patients with late-stage metastatic pancreatic cancer, showing that targeting just a single an epitope can lead to quite significant responses in those patients. Also extremely durable, in a context of a patient group where you wouldn't expect durability. So, I think when you see data like that, it does transform you. So Neogene's proposition is like, hey, we've got this TCR discovery. They're taking TCR therapy to the next level. The dream is, well, what about making synthetic TILs? So you use the tumor as the drug, the human body is the drug discovery machine, and it has all the T cell receptors that can recognize the tumor, but those T cells are not particularly functionally competent to deliver the elimination. There are other T cells in the body that are perfectly competent, and so if you can capture those T cells from TCRs from the patient's biopsy, match them to the mutational neoantigens, and create a bespoke T cell product and infuse them back into the patients, that could be a very effective therapy. So they're running that trial now. I have to say it's extremely exciting. It's really pushing medicine, I think, to the limit. So from us, in terms of what was attractive with Neogene, we didn't have any TCR. I was very frustrated. We had no TCR efforts at AstraZeneca at all. We completely missed that one. And so we had a CAR T program, but we had no TCR. So, really that was a very good fit for us. And the ecosystem in Los Angeles is fantastic for cell therapy. You've got fantastic manufacturing here. You've got fantastic people here. And you've got an ecosystem that's very supportive. And, you've helped build that, Arie. And that should be recognized. I think that is what attracted us. We had access to that here, and a fantastic scientific team in the Netherlands that largely spun out of Ton Schumacher's lab with Carsten Linnemann. I think that was a really good fit for us. So the jury's still out as to whether those therapies will work, but it's down to a company like a pharmaceutical company to drive that forward and actually test that hypothesis. So that's what we're doing.
Thanks. As you heard from Dr. John Mazziotta today, across the street here, there will be we are building the California Institute of Immunology and Immunotherapy. So we'll have space for you if you're interested, just so you'll know. David, you are a visionary, not only because you're trained by Dennis Slamon, but you are a visionary. In 5-10 years, where is cell therapy going, in your mind? In general, not kind of oncology. Where are we heading?
4 to 5 years, I think.
There will be fatigue?
I think exactly the opposite. I mean, already, we heard little glimpse of how long the innovation take, how long it took for, antibodies, monoclonal antibodies to come in vogue. That was more than 20 plus years. Even ADCs, your own experience, you're talking about 25 years from the discovery of the target to the product, coming to the market. I mean, cell therapy certainly is, probably from the pharmaceutical perspective, you're dealing with the live cells. So there are a lot of nuance on how to deal with the cells, not just manufacturing, but also being able to use the cells as a pharmaceutical, pharmaceutical drug delivery system. So I think the key question, with a cell therapy is, can this go from, one at a time manufacturing to off the shelf? And I think that, question is already being addressed, that the field is moving to the off the shelf. And also coming out of the, hematologic malignancies to solid tumors, there's a lot of exciting data coming from various different targets. At Allogene, we work on target called CD70. There are other targets such as Claudin-6, Claudin-18.2, that's being utilized for the cell therapy. So solid tumor barrier, as far as I'm concerned, that's broken, and I think that will work very well with other types of cell therapy as T cell receptor directed therapy to really make an impact in solid tumor. And then, as we talked about, probably one of the most exciting concept that's sort of emerging is cell therapy moving into the autoimmune disorders. So the field of autoimmune disorders are moving away from disease-modifying, agents to something that can really address the underlying defect of autoimmune disorders.
Okay, in kind of the last 10 minutes, Maybe Aamir, you tell us. We all read in our literature quite almost every week that this company, X Big Pharma, went to China to buy some innovation. Where is Pfizer in that? What's your thinking on China or versus made in the US?
If you look at China, we're talking about 200,000 plus PhDs, over 5,000 or 6,000 biotechs growing by the week. Upwards of, I think on last count, over 900, probably by now 1,000 late stage programs that are considered to be innovative science. It's hard to look at those statistics and not come to the conclusion that out of all of that, especially as it's growing, there is some truly innovative science. And I think that is only going to continue to grow. I think the challenge for all of us is what is the most appropriate way to start to access that? How do you sift through all of that and make sense of what has potential, what doesn't, what's real? And we see it as a material opportunity. Now, as I say that, for us, when we think about where we want to invest in innovation, it's not going to be driven with a geographic focus. Our focus is always going to be on where can we find the most compelling science. But I think it would be very short-sighted to overlook China as a source of major innovation going forward.
AstraZeneca is big in China, no?
For oncology, yes, we are. I think we've built a significant presence in China, and definitely would agree with Aamir. The innovation in China has really leapt forward over the last 10 years, and the pace in which they can operate is incredibly fast. I mean, when you look at cell therapy in particular, they've really innovated there in terms of how research can get done. So they have these, investor-initiated trials. So the trials can move into humans so much faster than they can in the rest of the world. And I think that really gives them a competitive advantage. And they have a really strong science now. They have well-trained scientists. There's world-class science there that's going on, and really is going to give the US and the rest of the world a run for its money actually over the next decade. So I think that is actually a big story that's happening, is how do we compete on this side with China actually, rather than the other way around. So there's going to be huge opportunities, but then there are obviously issues with China. I mean, how geopolitically stable it is, and it can be very difficult to make those risk assessments. Going forward. I mean, that's my own personal view rather than AstraZeneca's perhaps. But, those are the things you have to weigh out. But certainly in the visits I've had there, I've been blown away with the level of innovation, the level of scale in which they can operate as well.
Norbert, you had been in developing in China for many years, still from the days of Gilead. What's your impression?
Yeah, I would agree with what was said here. I mean, it's a large country, very, very dedicated people, very hardworking, and it certainly we should not overlook that. Yeah, we had a site in Shanghai that we had an R&D site with Gilead.
It's amazing to see what happened when we came first to Shanghai, and we used to go there and start building with Fosun Pharma partnership 10 years ago, going to the Chinese FDA. This has been completely changed. So what we see today is not 30 years of experience. It's, I would say, less than a decade. And that's kind of what we think. Let's talk a little bit in the last few minutes. As I said before, we are trying to build Greater Los Angeles as a hub for biotech. And when you look at that, I'm sure that Los Angeles is not on your map, or is it?
Certainly is now.
Good, okay. We achieved something today, okay. That's great. But in general, how are you looking at the world, the view, and the strategy? Essentially, you are running the strategy for Pfizer. So give us some tips.
I think what you have in LA, as I'm getting a greater and greater appreciation of it, is representative of a set of ingredients that I think are critical for success in driving innovation. It's the combination of world-class academia with the right long-term interest in capital that is willing to invest behind that science. It's proximity, broadly speaking, to world-class capabilities in larger scale pharmaceutical companies, a incredibly strong talent base. And when you put those things together, I think that is what you need to make innovation happen. Because if I go back to what I described earlier, I think it's also short-sighted for any one company to assume that they have a monopoly on driving innovation forward. So I think Los Angeles in some ways represents what exists perhaps in many other places too, as this ecosystem that pulls these things together. And I think it is incumbent upon all of us to be very directly plugged into it. And I described earlier a few mechanisms that we're looking at to do exactly that.
I hope somebody is recording it because we'll need it for our promotion for the California Institute. So I hope there is a video on that. Thank you very much. But the idea is you have here Caltech, you have Cedars, you have USC, you have UCLA. I mean, for years we were frustrated because all the postdocs would go either north to the Bay Area or south San Diego or then to the East Coast. And we see that changing dramatically, and that's why we are very excited. In the last, we have 2 minutes. Any questions to the panel? Just if somebody stand up and ask a question, please.
I have a fairly specific cell therapy question, but it's related to innovation and efficiency as well. And if you look at the pipeline of what's coming to cell therapy, there are an awful lot of CD19 targeted CAR-T in the pipeline. My question is, how many similar CAR-Ts do we need to develop rather than focus on making the ones that are available work for a greater number of patients?
How many more CAR-Ts you have to develop? The problem is more targets. We are developing the same target just because there are very few. How many targets do we have that we can develop CAR-T on the surface? That's kind of the bottleneck. But David, you are there.
I mean, CD19 is really one of the best targets for the CAR-T. But I think when you look at the field, the target continues to grow. You're talking about CD20, BCMA, GDRP5 for multiple myeloma as well, AML indications. So I think it's just, we have to keep in mind the entire field of cell therapy has history of about 7-8 years. And it's relatively early, and just stay tuned. I think you will see a tremendous growth of CAR-T therapies going after different targets.
Mark, we are the last 53 seconds.
Okay, I agree with the question. I think it's actually down to us to not, generate 100 PD-1s or 100, CD19. So, certainly at AstraZeneca, we are investing heavily in targeting the clinical problems. So, we were tasked with, go out there for solid tumors. So our programs on tumors, we've just announced, we're targeting STEAP2 for prostate cancer, which is an entirely new antigen. And then we've got 6 CAR-T programs that are, marching forward. They're all in solid tumors. They're all targeted at areas where there's unmet need. And just chasing after the same targets, I think actually is a problem for patients because, how many more products. I mean, lymphoma has so many therapies these days, and yet there are cancers like brain cancers and pancreatic cancers that have almost zero. So it is down to us to try and rebalance that.
Thank you. We are at 0,000. Thank you everybody for your attention, and I would like thank you to the panel and thank you all.